Good evening, my dear friend. Be still now. Let the day loosen its hold upon you. Let everything that seemed urgent a little while ago begin to move farther away, not because you are rejecting it, but because this is not the hour for carrying burdens. This is the hour for setting them down. If you are lying in bed, let the bed hold you more completely. If you are resting in a chair, let the chair take your weight. You do not need to hold yourself up so firmly now. You do not need to remain on guard. You may begin to release. There is nothing you must accomplish in this moment, nothing you must prove, nothing you must understand immediately. You are not required to listen perfectly. You are not required to concentrate. You are not required to imagine well. You are not required to manifest correctly. Let all such pressure fall away from you now. Tonight is not an examination. Tonight is not a contest of will. Tonight is not a performance of faith. Tonight is a quiet return. So begin with the body. Always begin with the body. Let the mind be left alone for a little while. It has worked enough, it has measured enough, it has questioned enough. Now we let the body teach the mind what peace feels like. Let the jaw loosen. Let it unclench softly. Let the tongue rest easily in the mouth. Let the tiny muscles around the eyes stop holding themselves so tightly. Let the eyelids grow heavier, not by effort, but by permission. Let the forehead smooth itself. Let the temples release. Let the neck be unburdened. Let the shoulders fall a little lower than they were a moment ago, and if they wish to fall lower still, let them. Let the chest soften. Let the heart no longer stand as a guard before tomorrow. Let the hands become still. Let the fingers no longer hold the memory of tension. Let the abdomen release. Let the belly stop bracing against life. Let the breath slow by itself. Do not try to breathe deeply. Do not improve the breath. Do not manage it. Simply let the breathing become quieter, easier, less urgent. It knows the way down better than the mind does. You are safe enough now to soften, safe enough to stop trying, safe enough to let the nervous system hear a different message than the one it has been hearing all day. There is nothing to force tonight, nothing to press into being, nothing that requires strain from you. The world may have taught you that all worthy things must be achieved through struggle, that change must be wrestled into existence, that life yields only to pressure. But I tell you tonight, in this still hour, there is another way. There is a deeper law, a gentler law, and it does not open to force. It opens to receptivity. It opens when the soul ceases its hard pushing and becomes willing to receive. Rest is not emptiness. Rest is not passivity. Rest is not failure to act. Rest is a kind of inward consent. It is the softening by which the deeper levels of being may finally be reached. And so as you lie here or sit here and let yourself descend, understand that nothing important is being neglected. On the contrary, something essential is beginning, for when the body grows quiet and the outer self stops straining, a subtler movement begins within, a silent movement, a powerful movement, the kind of movement that the world does not applaud because the world does not see it. Yet all great things are born from this hidden stillness. Now let your breathing continue to soften. Let each exhalation carry away some unnecessary effort. Let each breath out be a little act of surrender. Not surrender to failure, but surrender to peace. Not surrender to absence, but surrender to the deeper intelligence that has never required your panic in order to work. If thoughts arise, let them arise. You do not need to stop them. You do not need to chase them away. Let them pass as clouds pass over a night sky. The sky is not troubled by what moves through it. Be the sky tonight, wide enough that nothing passing through you needs to be fought. If a memory comes, let it come and go. If an unfinished concern appears, let it appear and go. If some small restlessness remains in the body, let even that be allowed. You need not be perfectly still in order to enter stillness. You need only stop resisting the descent. And now perhaps you can begin to feel a gentle heaviness in the body, not an oppressive heaviness, but a pleasant one. The heaviness of being held, the heaviness of no longer carrying yourself entirely by effort, the heaviness that comes when the body realizes it is no longer required to stand watch against the world. This is a holy kind of heaviness, a blessed descent. Let it deepen. Feel the bed beneath you, or the seat beneath you. Feel the simple fact that something is supporting you. You are not suspended in emptiness. You are not unsupported. You are not falling into nothingness. You are being held. The body understands being held more easily than the mind does. So let the body teach you. Let it show you what trust feels like before the mind can explain it. Let the support beneath you become a symbol of something larger, something already at work within you, something quiet and faithful and close. For there is something very near now, something already within you, something that does not need to be brought from afar, something that has not been absent, only unnoticed beneath noise, beneath tension, beneath effort, beneath the old habit of trying too hard. Do not reach for it, do not search for it, do not name it too quickly. Just let yourself become quiet enough to feel that it is near. That is enough. And because it is near, you do not need to labor toward it. You need only stop standing so far from yourself. You need only soften enough to notice what has always been waiting without pressure. There is a power in you that withdraws from strain but comes forward in stillness. There is a depth in you that cannot be entered by force, only by surrender. And tonight, as the day fades and your body loosens, you are coming nearer to that depth. You do not need to hurry. You do not need to make anything happen. You do not need to demand that something profound occur immediately. The night is patient. Truth is patient. The deeper self is patient. Let patience enter you now. Let slowness enter you now. Let silence become friendly. The world has trained many to fear silence, because in silence they can no longer distract themselves from what they carry. But tonight, silence is not an accusation. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is a chamber. Silence is a shelter. Silence is the threshold through which the deeper life comes nearer. So let the silence around you become welcome. Let it gather gently. Let it soften the edges of the day. Let it dim what no longer needs to shout at you. No one is asking anything from you here. No one is measuring you here. No one is testing the strength of your faith here. You are allowed simply to rest. You are allowed simply to receive. You are allowed simply to be. How rare that is for some. To not perform, to not improve the moment, to not assemble yourself into some worthy condition, to not earn peace by being good enough at being peaceful. But let that burden fall away too. Peace is not awarded to the most skilled. It is entered by the willing. And willingness tonight is very simple. It is only this: to let go a little more, to soften a little more, to trust a little more that you are safe enough now to stop trying. Now let your awareness drift down through the body, past the forehead, past the throat, past the chest, past the belly, down into the simple fact of rest. Let the mind descend into the body's quiet. Let the thoughts come farther apart. Let there be more space between them. Let the spaces become sweeter than the thoughts themselves. You may notice that the urge to do anything is beginning to lessen. That is good. You may notice that the need to solve is loosening. That is good. You may notice that the body is becoming more distant from effort and more intimate with stillness. That too is good. Nothing is wrong in this hour. Nothing is late in this hour. Nothing is missing from this moment that must be supplied by struggle. There is a time for outward movement in life. Yes, there is a time for speech, for decision, for action. But this is not that time. This is the hour before all that. This is the hour in which the soul remembers that creation begins in another order of being, not in noise, not in argument, not in force, but in the receptive depths. So let the body become quiet enough for that depth. Let the mind become unimportant for a little while. Let the old effort identity loosen its grip. You do not need to carry it into the night. You do not need to bring all your old tension into this sacred room. You do not need to drag the whole day behind you like a chain. Let it go. Let it go now. The day has done enough. The mind has said enough. The nervous system has protected enough. Now there is another movement, a softer one, a wiser one, a deeper one. And perhaps you can feel it now, not as an idea, but as a kind of inward opening, a subtle yielding. A sense that there is more space inside you than there was a few moments ago. More quiet, more room, more softness. This is the beginning. This is how the inner chamber opens. By permission, by releasing what is no longer needed. This night is not asking you to create by struggle. This night is asking you to become available. Available to stillness. Available to deeper feeling. Available to what is already near. Available to what is already within. Available to the quiet truth that does not need to shout in order to be real. And so remain here with me a little longer in this softened place. Let the words wash over you without any need to grasp them tightly. Let the sound be enough. Let the tone be enough. Let the simple feeling of being held be enough. The body is quieting. The day is receding. The mind is loosening its claim, and something gentle, something powerful, something already waiting beneath all your efforts is drawing a little nearer now. Do not move toward it. Let it come. Do not force the door. Let the door soften open. Do not strive to become ready. Rest and discover that readiness was hidden in rest itself. Now breathe again, slowly, naturally, without effort, and let yourself descend a little more, a little more, a little more, into stillness, into softness, into permission, into the sacred inward room, where nothing must yet be done and everything important may begin. Now let me tell you very softly why so many desire for years, and yet do not see the desire harden into fact. It is not always because they are unworthy. It is not because the law has favorites. It is not even in many cases because they do not know what they want. Very often they know quite well what they want. They can name it, they can feel its importance, they can think of it morning and night. They can pray for it, long for it, speak of it, dream of it. And yet it remains for them something postponed, something hoped for, something nearly touched but never fully lived. Why? Because many desire from lack, not from possession. This is the great hidden error. They want, but they do not inwardly own. They ask, but they do not accept. They long, but they do not dwell. And so the desire remains where they keep placing it outside themselves. Before them, beyond them, above them, always almost, never quite. Now hear me tenderly, because this is not said to blame you, it is said to free you. There is a world of difference between desiring a thing and inwardly accepting that it is yours. Many think these are the same. They are not. Desire by itself can still imply distance. Desire can still say, I do not have. Desire can still carry the feeling of waiting, of reaching, of absence. Desire can still place the object in the future and the self in the present as one not yet completed. And when desire is held in that manner, no matter how sincere, it often continues to produce more of its own structure, more waiting, more reaching, more signs of not yet. This is why asking is not the same as accepting. A man may ask for wealth for 20 years and still inwardly remain poor. A woman may ask for love for half a lifetime and still inwardly remain unloved. Another may ask for freedom, ask for healing, ask for peace, and yet continue each day to identify as one who has not received. The lips may say, I want it. The heart may even ache sincerely for it. But the deeper self, the feeling self, still says, it is not mine. It is not here. It is elsewhere. I am still outside. And that is what the world continues to mirror. For the world responds to state, not to the sheer intensity of desire. That sentence must be understood deeply. The world responds to state, not to intensity. The world is not moved because you want with great force. It is not impressed because you have suffered much from not having. It does not yield merely because the longing has become painful. It reflects the state in which you dwell. If you dwell in longing, it reflects longing. If you dwell in waiting, it reflects waiting. If you dwell in separation, it reflects separation. If you dwell in fulfilled identity, it reflects fulfillment. So then, the problem is not usually that one wants too much. The problem is that one continues to inhabit the desire as something external. This is the point I want to place in your hands as gently as possible tonight. Many people do not actually carry the desire as already accepted within. They carry it as an object to be obtained. They place it over there somewhere in time, somewhere in circumstance, somewhere beyond the present self. They wake and think of it as absent. They move through the day and think of it as delayed. They go to sleep and think of it as hoped for. Even their prayer often carries the structure of distance. May this come. May I receive. May life bring it. May it finally happen. And all the while, the deeper state remains one of non-possession. Now perhaps you begin to see why some things do not harden into fact. Even after much yearning, they are not hardening because they are not being inwardly accepted as facts. They are being admired, requested, waited for, emotionally circled, but not assumed. They are being treated as cherished possibilities, not as inward realities. And yet the law asks not whether you want the thing. It asks, in effect, who are you in relation to it now? How do you carry it now? What do you feel yourself to be now? If in relation to it you remain the one who is still trying to get, still trying to move, still trying to persuade reality to become favorable, then that relation itself becomes the state. The world reflects your relation to the desire just as much as the desire itself. So many have strong desire and weak inward acceptance. That is the hidden delay. They do not lack sincerity. They lack possession in consciousness. And I say that very tenderly, for it can be corrected the moment it is seen, the moment one realizes, ah, I have been loving the desire, but carrying it as absent, a new possibility opens. One no longer needs to keep pushing. One begins to understand that the real shift is not in the outer object first, but in the inward relationship to it. The desire must cease to be treated as a distant guest and be welcomed as an inward fact. This is why an answer may come not through greater effort, but through deeper acceptance, not through pushing harder, but through ceasing to push it away by the very manner in which you want it. Do you see the paradox? A person says, I want this with all my heart, and perhaps they do, but all day long the heart also says, it is not mine, it has not come, I am still outside it. That is the contradiction. One hand reaches toward fulfillment, while the deeper self continues to identify with non-fulfillment. And the law, being exact, reflects the deeper identification. That is why longing, waiting, and observing often reinforce distance. Longing says, I am not there. Waiting says, it is not now. Observing says, let me see whether it has become true yet. And all three, though they feel natural to the untrained self, keep the desire in front of consciousness instead of within it. Now let there be no harshness in you as you hear this. Rather, let there be relief. Relief that perhaps nothing mysterious was against you. Relief that perhaps the law was never failing. Relief that perhaps your desire was not too great, nor your path too difficult, nor your case too delayed for any special reason. Relief that perhaps the whole matter turns upon something quieter and more merciful. How you carry the desire inside yourself. Perhaps the real change is not that you must want more. Perhaps the real change is that you must accept more. Perhaps the real movement is not toward greater intensity. Perhaps it is toward inward union. What would it mean to stop carrying the desire as something external? It would mean, first, no longer making your inner posture one of pleading, no longer treating the wish as if it lived only in some future arrangement of facts, no longer thinking of yourself as one waiting at the gate. It would mean beginning to feel, however gently at first, that the desired reality is already admitted in consciousness, already welcomed, already closer than appearance suggests. This does not mean you must deny your present senses in a foolish way. It means you must cease giving the senses the final word. It means the desire is no longer treated as a distant object to be fetched from life, but as a state to be worn, accepted, and lived from within. That is a very different thing. The man who carries wealth as an external object says, I hope it comes. The man who has begun inward acceptance says, it is already admitted within me. The woman who carries love as an external object says, perhaps one day I shall be chosen. The woman who has begun inward acceptance says, I no longer carry myself as one outside of love. Do you hear how identity changes the relation? That is the key. It is not that the object is different. It is that the self in relation to the object is different, and the world mirrors the relation. This is why I say again, the world responds to state, not to intensity of desire. You may want with all your might and still remain in the state of not having. You may whisper one quiet acceptance and begin at last to move inwardly into the state of having. The law is not moved by volume, it is moved by occupancy. So if tonight, as you lie there, you begin to feel a little less urgent, a little less outwardly reaching, a little more willing to let the desire come closer inwardly, not as dream, but as admitted reality, then something very important has begun. The delay is already being addressed at its root. For the root was not that you lacked desire. The root was that the desire had not yet been welcomed into your sense of self as something already near, already natural, already inwardly accepted. No, you do not need to push harder, you need to accept more deeply. No, you do not need to beg longer. You need to cease carrying the wish as though it belonged only to another time. No, the problem was not usually that you wanted too much. The problem was that you were still living as one apart from what was wanted. That is why it did not harden into fact, and that is why it can, because now you see more clearly where the real movement must happen. Not first in the world, first in the inward relation. First in the sense of self, first in how the desire is carried. So let that thought become very gentle and very freeing as you continue to soften into this night. Perhaps the answer is simpler than struggle. Perhaps the desire was delayed because it was still being loved from a distance. Perhaps all that is asked now is that you let it come nearer than longing, nearer than waiting, nearer than hope, nearer than observation. Let it come into acceptance. into inward belonging, into the feeling that the thing desired need no longer stand outside the door of your life, asking to be admitted. Perhaps now, at last, you understand why it did not harden into fact. And perhaps now, very quietly, you understand how it begins. Now let us place the foundation more firmly beneath you. For if you are to listen in the night and let the desire harden into fact, you must understand the order of creation. You must know what comes first and what comes second. You must know where the true movement begins. For the world has taught you one order, and I teach another. The world says that visible things are the cause, and inward feeling is the effect. The world says, when the money appears, then I shall feel secure. When the letter comes, then I shall relax. When the person returns, then I shall believe. When the body changes, then I shall know. But I tell you the exact opposite. Consciousness first, world second, assumption first, fact second, the invisible first, the visible after. The visible world does not initiate, it reflects, it does not command, it reports, it does not decide, it echoes. This is why I have said again and again that the world is yourself pushed out, not because the world is unreal in the childish sense, but because it is derivative. It is not first cause, it is the effect of states entertained, accepted, and dwelt in. The event is later than the assumption. The harvest is later than the seed. The shadow is later than the form that casts it. The echo is later than the voice. Think of the world as a mirror. The mirror does not begin your expression, it returns it. If you smile, the mirror smiles after. If you frown, it frowns after. But the world, because it moves in time and sequence, often appears slower than a common mirror. It is more like an echo in a valley. You speak, and after a little while, the sound returns to you. If you stand there listening only to the echo, you may imagine the valley is deciding what to say. It is not. It is only giving back what was sent into it. So too with life. Consciousness is the sending. The world is the returning. This is why the desire fulfilled must be born first in consciousness. It must be admitted inwardly before it can be confirmed outwardly. If you wait for the world to begin the change, you will wait forever, because the world does not begin. It answers. It reflects. It hardens into fact what has first been accepted as truth within. This is the secret that so many resist, because it places creation not in circumstance, but in being. They would rather react to appearances than generate them. They would rather be told who they are by the day than decide who they are in consciousness. Yet the law never changes for their preference. It remains faithful. Consciousness first, world second. And this is why the common human approach fails so often. The common man says, when it appears, I will believe. He stands before the mirror, demanding that the reflection move first. He stands in the field, demanding harvest before seed. He listens to the valley, demanding echo before voice. He asks the shadow to move independently of the form. And because he asks what cannot be first to go first, he remains suspended between wanting and seeing. But I say, when I assume, it will appear. That is the whole difference. The world says, show me, and I will feel. I say, feel, and it will show. The world says, once the fact arrives, then I can rest. I say, rest in the fact inwardly, and the outer fact must follow. The world says, let me see it first. I say, let me be it first. Do you feel the revolution in that? It is not merely a method, it is a complete reversal of causation. It takes power away from appearances without denying that appearances matter. It simply places them in their rightful position, second, never first. That is why tonight, as you listen and drift nearer to sleep, you need not ask the world for permission to begin. You do not depend upon the outer to start the process. You do not need evidence to become inwardly loyal. You do not need the fact to begin feeling the truth of it. The world visible arrives later. This is a merciful thing once understood. For if the world were first, you would be forever at the mercy of delay, forever forced to take appearances as final instruction, forever unable to begin until circumstances became kind. But because consciousness is first, you may begin now. In this room, in this body, on this pillow, in this stillness, you may begin without waiting for any person, letter, bank, body, season, or sign. You may accept inwardly before the world has any visible courtesy to show you. And that acceptance is not fantasy. It is planting. It is not pretending. It is selecting the cause. It is not self-deception. It is the wise use of law. For every visible thing was once invisible. Every fact was once only an inward arrangement. Every result was first an unseen state. Men call the visible practical and the invisible uncertain only because they see the end of a process and ignore its origin. But I am taking you back to origin tonight, back behind the event, back behind the report, back behind the mirror, back to the source. Now let us speak of this phrase in your title, for it is a wonderful phrase when rightly understood. Harden into fact. What does it mean? It means that what is inwardly assumed with enough continuity, enough acceptance, enough dwelling, begins to acquire density. What was once only feeling becomes tone. What was tone becomes state. What was state becomes expectation. What was expectation becomes natural. And what becomes natural hardens. It takes form. It becomes fact. Not because the world was persuaded by pleading, but because consciousness persisted long enough in one form that the outer world had to crystallize around it. This hardening is not violence, it is ripening. It is not magical theater, it is law. It is not the sudden invention of something from nothing, it is the visible solidification of what has already been inwardly entertained. Like water freezing into visible shape after a quiet shift in temperature, so the desire hardens into fact after the inward state has been sufficiently accepted. The visible world is the final stage, not the first. The fact is the shadow's maturity, the harvest's arrival, the echo returning, the mirror finally catching up. So if tonight you accept something inwardly, do not think you have done something weak because no one saw it. You have moved at the level where movement matters most. You have touched cause. The world has not yet had its turn to respond, but it must. That is what law means. Not maybe. Not perhaps if circumstances are kind, must. And because this is true, something very calming becomes possible in the listener. You no longer need to look outward in desperation. You no longer need to bow before every appearance. You no longer need to say, nothing is real until the senses confirm it. No, what is real begins before the senses report it. The senses are late witnesses, consciousness is the author. That is why I want you to feel this in your body now. I do not depend on the exterior to begin. The world visible comes later. If I accept it within, the outer must follow. These are not empty comforts. They are the very bones of the teaching. If you understand this deeply, you stop asking the world to lead. You stop asking the harvest to explain the seed. You stop asking shadows to become causes, and you begin to live from the center. Now, of course, this does not mean you deny what you see. It means you rank it properly. You may see the circumstance and still know it is second. You may feel the delay and still know it is second. You may hear the old report and still know it is second. You may move through the ordinary world and still inwardly say, you are later than what I have accepted. That is not denial. That is wisdom. That is order restored. So tonight, let the old human order soften and the deeper order take its place. Let this become gentle truth in you, consciousness first, world second, voice first, echo second, form first, shadow second, seed first, harvest second, assumption first, fact second. And if you keep that order, if you honor it in the night, if you let your desire be accepted in consciousness before you demand to touch it in flesh and circumstance, then you are already moving according to law. Then you are no longer waiting at the end of the chain. You are working at the beginning of it. And what begins rightly, if sustained, must end visibly. So rest in this now. You do not depend on the outer to begin. The visible world arrives after. If you accept it within, the external must in time take its shape. That is not hope, that is law. And tonight, as you soften more deeply, it is enough that you begin, where all things truly begin. Now let us place the foundation more firmly beneath you. For if you are to listen in the night and let the desire harden into fact, you must understand the order of creation. You must know what comes first and what comes second. You must know where the true movement begins. For the world has taught you one order, and I teach another. The world says that visible things are the cause, and inward feeling is the effect. The world says when the money appears, then I shall feel secure. When the letter comes, then I shall relax. When the person returns, then I shall believe. When the body changes, then I shall know. But I tell you the exact opposite. Consciousness first, world second, assumption first, fact second, the invisible first, the visible after. The visible world does not initiate, it reflects. It does not command, it reports. It does not decide, it echoes. This is why I have said again and again that the world is yourself pushed out, not because the world is unreal in the childish sense, but because it is derivative. It is not first cause. It is the effect of states entertained, accepted, and dwelt in. The event is later than the assumption. The harvest is later than the seed. The shadow is later than the form that casts it. The echo is later than the voice. Think of the world as a mirror. The mirror does not begin your expression. It returns it. If you smile, the mirror smiles after. If you frown, it frowns after. But the world, because it moves in time and sequence, often appears slower than a common mirror. It is more like an echo in a valley. You speak, and after a little while the sound returns to you. If you stand there listening only to the echo, you may imagine the valley is deciding what to say. It is not. It is only giving back what was sent into it. So too with life. Consciousness is the sending. The world is the returning. This is why the desire fulfilled must be born first in consciousness. It must be admitted inwardly before it can be confirmed outwardly. If you wait for the world to begin the change, you will wait forever, because the world does not begin. It answers, it reflects, it hardens into fact what has first been accepted as truth within. This is the secret that so many resist, because it places creation not in circumstance, but in being. They would rather react to appearances than generate them. They would rather be told who they are by the day than decide who they are in consciousness. Yet the law never changes for their preference. It remains faithful. Consciousness first, world second. And this is why the common human approach fails so often. The common man says, when it appears, I will believe. He stands before the mirror, demanding that the reflection move first. He stands in the field, demanding harvest before seed. He listens to the valley, demanding echo before voice. He asks the shadow to move independently of the form. And because he asks what cannot be first to go first, he remains suspended between wanting and seeing. But I say, when I assume, it will appear. That is the whole difference. The world says, show me, and I will feel. I say, feel, and it will show. The world says, once the fact arrives, then I can rest. I say, rest in the fact inwardly, and the outer fact must follow. The world says, let me see it first. I say, let me be it first. Do you feel the revolution in that? It is not merely a method, it is a complete reversal of causation. It takes power away from appearances without denying that appearances matter. It simply places them in their rightful position second, never first. That is why tonight, as you listen and drift nearer to sleep, you need not ask the world for permission to begin. You do not depend upon the outer to start the process. You do not need evidence to become inwardly loyal. You do not need the fact to begin feeling the truth of it. The world visible arrives later. This is a merciful thing once understood, for if the world were first, you would be forever at the mercy of delay, forever forced to take appearances as final instruction, forever unable to begin until circumstances became kind. But because consciousness is first, you may begin now, in this room, in this body, on this pillow, in this stillness. You may begin without waiting for any person, letter, bank, body, season, or sign. You may accept inwardly before the world has any visible courtesy to show you. And that acceptance is not fantasy. It is planting. It is not pretending. It is selecting the cause. It is not self-deception. It is the wise use of law. For every visible thing was once invisible. Every fact was once only an inward arrangement. Every result was first an unseen state. Men call the visible practical and the invisible uncertain only because they see the end of a process and ignore its origin. But I am taking you back to origin tonight, back behind the event, back behind the report, back behind the mirror, back to the source. Now let us speak of this phrase in your title, for it is a wonderful phrase when rightly understood, harden into fact. What does it mean? It means that what is inwardly assumed with enough continuity, enough acceptance, enough dwelling, begins to acquire density. What was once only feeling becomes tone. What was tone becomes state. What was state becomes expectation. What was expectation becomes natural. And what becomes natural hardens. It takes form. It becomes fact. Not because the world was persuaded by pleading, but because consciousness persisted long enough in one form that the outer world had to crystallize around it. This hardening is not violence, it is ripening. It is not magical theater, it is law. It is not the sudden invention of something from nothing. It is the visible solidification of what has already been inwardly entertained. Like water freezing into visible shape after a quiet shift in temperature, so the desire hardens into fact after the inward state has been sufficiently accepted. The visible world is the final stage, not the first. The fact is the shadow's maturity, the harvest's arrival, the echo returning, the mirror finally catching up. So if tonight you accept something inwardly, do not think you have done something weak because no one saw it. You have moved at the level where movement matters most. You have touched cause. The world has not yet had its turn to respond, but it must. That is what law means. Not maybe, not perhaps if circumstances are kind. Must. And because this is true, something very calming becomes possible in the listener. You no longer need to look outward in desperation. You no longer need to bow before every appearance. You no longer need to say, nothing is real until the senses confirm it. No. What is real begins before the senses report it. The senses are late witnesses. Consciousness is the author. That is why I want you to feel this in your body now. I do not depend on the exterior to begin. The world visible comes later. If I accept it within, the outer must follow. These are not empty comforts. They are the very bones of the teaching. If you understand this deeply, you stop asking the world to lead. You stop asking the harvest to explain the seed. You stop asking shadows to become causes, and you begin to live from the center. Now, of course, this does not mean you deny what you see. It means you rank it properly. You may see the circumstance and still know it is second. You may feel the delay and still know it is second. You may hear the old report and still know it is second. You may move through the ordinary world and still inwardly say, you are later than what I have accepted. That is not denial. That is wisdom. That is order restored. So tonight, let the old human order soften and the deeper order take its place. Let this become gentle truth in you. Consciousness first, world second, voice first, echo second, form first, shadow second, seed first, harvest second, assumption first, fact second. And if you keep that order, if you honor it in the night, if you let your desire be accepted in consciousness before you demand to touch it in flesh and circumstance, then you are already moving according to law. Then you are no longer waiting at the end of the chain, you are working at the beginning of it. And what begins rightly, if sustained, must end visibly. So rest in this now. You do not depend on the outer to begin. The visible world arrives after. If you accept it within, the external must in time take its shape. That is not hope, that is law. And tonight, as you soften more deeply, it is enough that you begin where all things truly begin. Now let me speak very carefully about this phrase, because it is beautiful when understood rightly and dangerous when treated as a cheap promise. When I say that your desire will harden into fact, I am not speaking of sudden magic in the childish sense. I am not speaking of some theatrical interruption of law. I am speaking of law itself. I am speaking of the natural solidifying of what has been inwardly accepted, repeated, felt, and dwelt in until it becomes objective. The phrase is not sensational when rightly heard. It is reverent. It points to a process so deep and so faithful that most men live under it all their lives without knowing that it is happening. To harden into fact means that what was first subtle becomes solid. What was inward becomes outward. What was once only a felt reality, invisible to the senses, acquires form, shape, sequence, circumstance, and event. It means the unseen assumption gathers density. It becomes more than a passing thought, more than a wish, more than a lovely mood. It settles into the deeper layers of being until the world must begin arranging itself around it. That is what hardening means. Not noise, not spectacle, not frantic suddenness, ripening, crystallization, the lawful objectifying of what was accepted within. Every visible thing was once invisible. Every fact was once only an impression. Every circumstance that now seems so solid, so undeniable, so outwardly real, began somewhere beneath the senses as a state, an assumption, a consciousness of being. Men look at facts as though facts were first, but facts are only the late stage of a process whose beginning was hidden. The visible world is filled with hardened assumptions, some lovely, some painful, some noble, some false, some chosen, some inherited, but all of them first lived inwardly, long before they were called reality. That is why I want you to hear this with reverence tonight. This is not fantasy, it is law. Fantasy is a passing amusement that one does not inhabit. Law is what happens whether one understands it or not. And the law here is this: what is repeatedly accepted as true in consciousness tends toward objectification. What is inwardly given reality begins to gather form. What is dwelt in becomes externalized. The accepted state seeks embodiment. The sustained assumption tends toward fact. Now notice that I say repeatedly accepted, not briefly admired, not occasionally touched, not spoken of as something one would like to believe, repeatedly accepted. This is why persistence matters, but not the persistence of strain, rather the persistence of dwelling. A quiet, steady, faithful remaining in the state, until the inward arrangement is so natural that the outer world must begin to wear its image. Think of water slowly freezing. At first it is fluid, it has no fixed outer form, yet under sustained conditions it begins to change its nature. It does not become ice by one violent command, it becomes ice through a steady process, a lawful one, a faithful one. So too does assumption harden into fact. First the inward acceptance, then the repeated return, then the growing naturalness, then the quiet solidity of the thing in consciousness, and then, in due course, fact. Or think of a seed. When first planted, it is hidden. No one walking above the soil would say the field is changed, yet the unseen work has begun. The seed does not become harvest by being dug up every morning. It becomes harvest by remaining in the right condition long enough for what is hidden to become visible. So too with your assumption. It does not harden into fact because you inspect it anxiously. It hardens into fact because you remain loyal to it while it deepens, roots, organizes, and rises into visible form. This is why persistence without tension is so important. Many hear the word persistence and imagine pressure. They imagine holding on with clenched inward fists. They imagine repeating the desire with intensity born of fear. They imagine keeping it alive by emotional effort. But that is not the persistence I mean. That kind of strain often reveals that the thing is still being held as distant, still being treated as not yet secure. The persistence of which I speak is gentler than that. It is the persistence of returning, the persistence of remaining, the persistence of not leaving the room once you have entered it, the persistence of inward acceptance becoming more normal than doubt. When a thing is truly hardening into fact, it often grows quieter in you, not louder. It becomes less dramatic, not more. Less feverish, not more. You are no longer trying to make yourself believe it every hour. You begin instead to notice that you simply do believe it more often. Or rather, you are less and less able to return fully to the old unbelieving self. The new state is gaining density. The old one is losing authority. That too is part of hardening. The visible fact is not the first sign. The first sign is that the inward state feels more settled, more ordinary, more accepted. So do not imagine that hardening into fact means you must wake tomorrow to instant proof, or else nothing is happening. No, it means that what is inwardly accepted is moving toward its visible counterpart by law. Some things come quickly because resistance is small and naturalness is near. Some take longer because the old room was deeply furnished and long inhabited, but the principle is the same. What is really accepted does not remain forever without outer correspondence. It may delay, it may pass through strange bridges, it may arrive by ways the mind did not predict, but the law remains the law. The fact is the final form of something already lived inside. That sentence is worth resting in. The fact is the final form of something already lived inside, not imagined in a weak passing way, not entertained and abandoned, but lived, accepted, worn, dwelt in, given room enough in consciousness to organize feeling, identity, expectation, and interpretation around itself. When that has happened, the visible fact is no longer the beginning of reality. It is its outer arrival. This is why I urge you never to think of the imaginal act as small, merely because it is unseen. The imaginal act, if truly accepted, is the beginning of fact. It does not look like a fact yet to the senses, but in the deeper order, it is the first movement toward one. The world may still call it imagination, but the law recognizes it as cause, and if cause remains faithful to itself, effect must come. Now perhaps you can feel why this teaching demands reverence. We are not speaking of positive thinking. We are not speaking of superficial optimism. We are not speaking of saying pretty things over an unchanged inner state. We are speaking of the ancient law by which consciousness clothes itself in form. We are speaking of the way reality itself emerges from the invisible into the visible. That is why I do not want you to hear harden into fact as mere promise. I want you to hear it as revelation. The visible world is not random. It is the final firmness of something that was soft before, subtle before, interior before. So if tonight you accept the desire inwardly, do not belittle that acceptance because the senses cannot yet applaud it. You may have already touched the beginning of fact. If you persist in the right state, the fact will come, not because you bullied life, not because you stared at the mirror until it obeyed, but because law fulfilled itself through your sustained inward consent. And what then is required of you? Not more desperation, not more outward grabbing, not more anxious repetition. What is required is that you persist in the state without becoming tense, that you let the assumption remain, that you continue to carry it as accepted rather than desired from a distance, that you return gently when you drift, that you allow what is still fluid within to become gradually more solid, more natural, more unquestioned. This is one of the most difficult things for the impatient mind to accept, because the impatient mind wants the fact before the hardening. It wants the harvest before the season. It wants the mirror before the face. It wants visible solidity before inward settlement. But the deeper self, the wiser self, can begin to understand that the process itself is holy, the invisible becoming visible, the accepted becoming objective, the felt becoming factual. This is not slowness for its own sake. It is ripening under law. So let your heart grow reverent toward this. Let there be less demand and more trust. Let there be less fascination with how fast and more devotion to how true. For if it is true within and truly persisted in, then the outer fact belongs to the process already. This is not fantasy. This is law. If I persist in the right state, the fact will come. Let that be heard by the deeper self tonight. Let it settle beyond argument. Let it become calmer than hope and stronger than excitement. You do not need to make the fact happen by force. You need only remain loyal to what, once accepted in consciousness, must in its own appointed way and hour take form. That is what hardening into fact really means. And to understand it is to stop treating the invisible as weak, simply because it is still hidden. Now we come to the hidden center, the root beneath all roots, the simplest thing and yet the most easily overlooked. Before every desire, before every fear, before every condition, before every visible circumstance, there is this sense of being. Before the world says anything about you, you have already said something inwardly, by the way you feel yourself to be. Before the fact appears, the identity has already spoken. And that identity, in its simplest form, is always announced in these two words: I am. I am. There is no phrase more intimate than that. There is no name closer to you. You may change your occupation, your address, your companions, your outward situation, your bank balance, your health, the opinions others hold of you, and yet behind all of these there remains that quiet awareness of being. I am. It is the root of every lived identity. It is the center from which all the branches grow. It is the doorway through which consciousness moves into form. This is why I have taught that I am is the name of God in man. Not as some theological ornament, but as living truth. For what is God if not the creative power of reality itself? And where is that power known first in you, if not in this awareness of being? The moment you say I am, you are naming yourself as cause before you add any condition to the statement. Then whatever you join to it becomes the direction of your state. Whatever follows, I am begins to clothe consciousness. It takes on weight. It gathers feeling. It shapes the room from which you live. This is why what is joined to I am becomes state, not merely idea, not merely language. State. If I say inwardly and repeatedly, I am still waiting, then waiting is not simply described. It is inhabited. It becomes the room. It becomes the tone. It becomes the climate in which I interpret everything else. The world then echoes back the self who waits. If I say, I am unlucky, I am not merely sighing. I am clothing consciousness in misfortune. I am choosing a room in which favorable events seem unnatural and disappointment feels expected. If I say, I am never chosen, I am not observing a neutral pattern. I am giving identity to exclusion. I am building a room in which every silence, every delay, every ordinary event is interpreted as rejection. If I say, I am the one who always struggles, I am not being honest in some harmless way. I am marrying myself to effort, to resistance, to the belief that life yields only through pain. These are not observations, they are decrees, creative decrees, and because they are spoken so casually, so habitually, so often beneath awareness, they are all the more powerful. Men imagine that only ceremonial statements create. They think that prayer must be formal, deliberate, sacred in appearance. Yet the deepest prayer is often hidden in the little phrases by which one continually names oneself. A complaint repeated often enough becomes creed. A casual identity repeated often enough becomes dwelling, and dwelling persisted in hardens into fact. So when I say that the hidden center is I am, I mean that the whole outer world begins not with circumstances, but with the inward naming of self. Long before the desire hardens into fact, identity hardens. Long before the visible world arranges itself into proof, the inward man has already taken a shape. The room is formed before the furniture appears. The seed of the fact is the self that says, I am, and then quietly adds its chosen condition. That is why the true work is so inward. People often think their problem is money, or timing, or another person, or the body, or the job, or the season, or some outer arrangement. But beneath all these visible difficulties, there is almost always identity. Not merely, what do I want? But who am I in relation to what I want? Not merely, where is the thing? But what have I called myself in relation to it? Have I named myself the one who never has enough? The one who is always overlooked? The one who must fight for every good thing? The one for whom relief always comes late? The one whose desire belongs only to others? Do you see how quietly the world is being named from within? You may not have realized it, but you have been naming your reality. Perhaps not with loud declarations, perhaps not even consciously, but by the little hidden unions with I am. I am still behind. I am tired of waiting. I am not the sort of one for whom these things happen. I am always the exception. I am not safe yet. I am still outside. These phrases are not harmless. They are not merely moods passing through. They are moldings of consciousness. They are acts of self-definition. They are the root language from which facts eventually arise. Now, I do not say this to condemn you. I say it to awaken you. For if I am has been used unconsciously to build rooms of waiting and lack, it can also be used consciously to build rooms of fulfillment. The same power that has named the old state may name the new. The same inward center that once clothed itself in fear may clothe itself in completion. The root is not broken. The root has merely been directed. And now, with tenderness and understanding, it may be directed again. This is why the change must begin here. Not first by asking the world to become different, but by changing what is joined to being itself. If for years one has said, I am the one who struggles, then the visible world has been asked, silently but faithfully, to mirror struggle. If one now begins to say, not by empty repetition, but by inward acceptance, I am the one for whom it is done, then another room begins to form, another state begins to harden, another world begins gathering its outlines around the root. So let us feel the sacred seriousness of this, but not as burden, as liberation. You are not merely reacting to life, you are naming it from the center. You are not merely reporting conditions. You are continually uniting identity with certain tones, meanings, and assumptions. That is the hidden cause. That is why I say the root of all is identity, not circumstances. Circumstances are branches. Identity is the root. A man may try to change the branch while watering the same root. A woman may try to change the harvest while planting the same seed. But when the root itself is altered, the branch must follow. When the seed changes, the harvest must follow. When what is joined to I am changes, the world must eventually reflect the new union. This is how the phrase, harden into fact, is truly understood. First identity hardens, then the world does. First the inward self becomes more solid in its new naming. Then the outer scene becomes solid around that new self. The world does not harden first. Identity does. That is why the earliest victory is often invisible. It is when the new I am begins to feel less like practice and more like home. I am already the one. I am no longer merely hoping. I am at rest in the accepted state. I am not outside my desire. I am not the old one anymore. Such statements, if inwardly accepted, do more than comfort. They change root identity. They begin to transfer dwelling from one room to another. And as that dwelling becomes more consistent, the visible world finds itself under new instruction. So tonight, as the body grows softer and the mind less insistent, let this thought become very quiet and very real in you. Before every condition there is I am. Before every fear there is I am. Before every desire there is I am. Before every delay, there is I am. Before every hardened fact, there was first a hardened identity. The world did not create that identity, it reflected it. And if identity changes, reflection must change. He has been naming my reality without my noticing. Yes, but now you may notice. And because you now notice, you may choose. If I change what I join to I am, my world must change, not by accident, by law. The root of everything is not in circumstances. The root is in being. And being speaks first in the quiet name, I am. So let the night take you nearer to that root. Let it strip away for a little while the clutter of appearances and bring you to the simple center. There, in the quiet awareness of being, you may begin again. There you may let the old naming loosen. There you may permit a new identity to settle. And because identity is cause, the world, which is only later, will in time have no choice but to wear the form of what you have at last chosen to be. Now let us make something very clear, so that this night does not become merely another hour of words spoken over an unchanged inner atmosphere. There are many who imagine that if they repeat the right sentence often enough, the law must obey the sound alone. They think that if they say, it is done enough times, or I am already the one, enough times, the thing must come, whether or not the heart has accepted it. But words by themselves do not create when feeling contradicts them. Words may point, words may direct, words may invite, but feeling is the seal. If a man says, I am at peace, while inwardly tightening against tomorrow, the words and the feeling are not one. If a woman says, it is done, while secretly scanning the horizon for proof, the lips and the state are divided. If one says, my desire is fulfilled, while inwardly remaining the one who longs, waits, wonders, and fears, then the sentence has not yet become life. The subconscious does not answer merely to the dictionary meaning of words. It answers to what is felt to be true. It responds to the emotional fact, not to the verbal ornament. This is why I tell you that the subconscious is impressed not by what you say with effort, but by what you feel as natural. The deeper self is moved by reality of feeling. It listens beneath language. It hears the mood in which words are spoken. It hears the tone of being. It knows whether a phrase is a borrowed costume or an inhabited truth. A sentence repeated from strain remains near the surface. A sentence joined to acceptance sinks. One is noise, the other is seed. So the important thing is not repetition alone. It is sealing with feeling. And what is that feeling? Here many misunderstand me. They think feeling must mean excitement, emotional uplift, tears, thrill, dramatic conviction. No, that may happen at times, but it is not what I mean at the deepest level. The feeling that seals the fulfilled desire is often far simpler than that. It is relief. It is quiet certainty. It is less urgency. It is less reaching. It is the absence of desperate pursuit. It is a new normality. It is the body no longer standing guard against life in quite the same way. Think of what happens when something is truly settled for you, not wished for, settled. There is often a small exhale, a softening in the belly, a release in the chest. The mind stops circling. You no longer chase the matter in thought, because the matter inwardly is no longer loose. That is the kind of feeling I mean. The wish fulfilled does not always feel like triumph. Often it feels like completion. It feels like inwardly putting something down. It feels like no longer needing to keep asking. It feels like the body quietly understanding, before the mind has much to say, that the thing is already accepted. Relief is one of the great signs, not the noisy relief of spectacle, the quiet relief of one who no longer feels excluded from the thing desired. Quiet certainty is another, not the certainty that argues, not the certainty that needs to prove itself, the quieter kind, the kind that resembles rest more than excitement. Less urgency is another sign. The old self hurries because it thinks the thing is outside and uncertain. The fulfilled self softens because it is no longer trying to pull the desire toward itself from a distance. There is less need to chase, less need to inspect, less need to rehearse, more normality. That is one of the deepest signs of all. When the desire begins to feel less like a dramatic possibility and more like something already inwardly included, then you are nearing the true seal, not because the world has yet fully shown it, but because the subconscious is beginning to treat it as part of your nature rather than part of your wishing. Now see the difference very clearly. A person may say, my desire is fulfilled. Good. But what matters is whether he feels himself to be the one whose desire is fulfilled. Those are not the same thing. One may repeat fulfilled language while still inhabiting unfulfilled identity. One may say all the right words and still remain, in body and tone and reaction, the one who is waiting outside the gate. If so, then the words have not yet reached the deeper chamber. The state has not yet been sealed. But when one begins to feel oneself as the fulfilled one, everything changes. The words, if spoken, sound different. They carry less desperation. They become less like requests and more like quiet acknowledgments. One no longer says, "It is done," in order to force belief. One says it because something in the deeper self has begun to agree. One no longer says, "I am already the one," as a chant against fear, but as a gentle recognition. That difference is enormous. The world sees repetition and thinks repetition is the cause. I say the accepted feeling is the cause. The words are useful only to the degree that they help bring you into the state. Once the state is felt, the words have done their service. Do not then cling to them as though sound alone were magical. Feeling is the seal. Imagine a letter written but never signed. Its content may be noble, beautiful, even precise, yet something is missing. It is not finished. So too with words without inward acceptance. They may describe the fulfilled state perfectly and still remain unsigned by consciousness. Feeling signs the letter. Feeling says, "Yes, this belongs to me. Yes, this is now my inward fact." And when feeling has signed it, the subconscious receives it differently. It is no longer merely heard. It is admitted. Now I do not want you to turn this into another burden. Do not begin asking, "Have I felt enough? Was the feeling strong enough? Was the seal complete enough?" No, that is only another form of strain. The feeling need not be enormous. It need only be true enough to quiet the old self for a little while, true enough to soften the body, true enough to lessen urgency, true enough that for a few moments you are no longer the one trying to get. You are the one who already is. That is enough, more than enough. If all that comes tonight is a small inward shift from tension to relief, do not despise it. If all that comes is a softer breath and the sense that you no longer need to force tomorrow, do not despise it. If all that comes is a quiet, almost plain feeling that the desire is no longer entirely outside you, do not despise it. These are the signatures of real acceptance. For the subconscious loves what feels natural. It receives most easily what the body does not resist. It is not impressed by verbal fireworks. If the nervous system still shouts, "Not yet," it is moved by atmosphere, by tone, by the inward sense of course, by the unforced mood in which one already belongs to what was once longed for. So tonight, if you speak inwardly at all, let the words be few and soft. Let them serve feeling, not replace it. Let them lead you toward the bodily atmosphere of the fulfilled desire. Let the phrase, "It is done," mean not, "I must make this true," but "I may now rest because this is inwardly accepted." Let the phrase, "I am already the one," mean not, "I must convince myself, but I no longer need to stand outside what I desire." This is the difference between saying desire fulfilled and feeling oneself the one who already lives it. One stands outside and names. The other enters and becomes. One uses words to point. The other lets feeling carry identity into the room. And identity, once entered, begins to rearrange the whole field of life. So let this truth become very gentle and very real in you now. You do not need to shout it. You do not need to force it. You do not need to whip yourself into emotional display. You need to feel it natural. You need the body to stop contradicting the words. You need the breath, the chest, the belly, the inward tone to begin agreeing with the fulfilled state. That is the seal. That is what gives the invisible weight. That is what lets the subconscious say, "Yes, this is so." The acceptance inside weighs more than the words upon the lips. The relief matters. The quiet certainty matters. The lessening of urgency matters. The absence of pursuit matters. The new normality matters. These are not lesser signs because they are softer. They are often greater signs because they are deeper. They belong not to performance but to possession. And so as you lie there now, closer perhaps to stillness than before, let the words become servants of acceptance. Let them move you toward quiet truth. Let them soften the old distance. Let them help the body understand that it need not keep living as one outside the door. Let them do only that, no more. And if they have done it, if even for a little while the desire feels less far away, less unreal, less dramatic, and more quietly yours, then the seal has begun. Now let us turn toward the very chamber for which this whole night has been prepared. For there is a reason I have asked you to listen here, near sleep, not in the full glare of the day. There is a reason the night is so often the hour of inward planting. There is a reason the great work is easier when the body is quiet and the world has grown dim. Sleep, rightly understood, is not merely a closing of the eyes. It is a creative chamber. It is one of the holiest doors in the whole structure of human experience. As you draw nearer to sleep, something beautiful begins to happen. The body becomes still. The senses begin to soften their rule. The eyes no longer insist upon visible proof. The ears grow less demanding. The hands no longer reach outward with the same urgency. The reasoning mind, which all day long has argued, compared, measured, and doubted, begins at last to loosen its grasp. The hard edges of logic soften. The critical faculty, so proud in daylight, grows drowsy. And in that blessed loosening, there opens what I have called the state akin to sleep. This state akin to sleep is not trivial. It is not merely a pleasant in-between. It is the great gate of the subconscious. It is the tender borderland, where the conscious mind is no longer so dominant, and the deeper self becomes more receptive. In that interval, impressions sink more deeply. What is accepted there carries unusual weight. That is why I say the moment before sleep matters so greatly. It is not passive, it is fertile, it is not empty, it is receptive. It is not the ending of the day alone, it is the opening of the deeper chamber. Most men misuse this chamber without knowing they are doing so. They fall asleep in worry. They lie down with the old conversation still turning in the mind. They rehearse debts. They replay the painful talk. They revisit the fear. They measure delay. They ask inwardly why nothing has changed. They go over the lack once more. They let the old self tell the last story of the night. And then they wonder why they wake again in the same atmosphere. But what entered the chamber before sleep was not peace. It was repetition of the old state. What was planted was not fulfillment, it was anxiety. What was impressed upon the deeper mind was not the wish fulfilled, but the old man still waiting, still fearing, still asking the world for permission. And so the night, which could have been used as a door, becomes merely an extension of the old room. This is why sleep must be reclaimed. You must understand what is happening in this hour. When the body grows still, when the senses dim, when reason yields a little, consciousness becomes more impressionable. What you feel in that interval enters more deeply than what you merely say in full daylight. What you accept just before sleep has a way of passing beyond the surface and laying hold of the deeper strata of self. That is why I would have you come to bed differently. That is why I would have this night become something other than repetition of the old story. This night you will not fall asleep as the old self. That is the great decision. This night you will not lie down as the one who is still outside the door. This night you will not carry the old waiting self across the threshold into sleep. This night you will not hand the subconscious the same old problem wrapped in slightly different words. No, this night you will enter sleep as the fulfilled one. You will let the body become quiet. Yes. You will let the eyes grow heavy. Yes. You will let the surface mind stop straining. Yes. But more than that, you will choose the mood in which you cross into sleep. You will choose the state. You will choose the room. You will choose what the deeper self receives as the final atmosphere of the night. Because what you feel before sleep is powerful. What you feel before sleep is formative. What you feel before sleep is not a passing decoration. It is impression. It is planting. It is selection. It is one of the great creative moments of the whole day. This is why I would say to you very plainly, the final feeling of the night matters. If the final feeling is pressure, you deepen pressure. If the final feeling is delay, you deepen delay. If the final feeling is absence, you deepen absence. But if the final feeling is completion, if it is quiet possession, if it is done, if it is the soft and inwardly natural acceptance of the wish fulfilled, then that too is planted. That too is carried downward. That too begins to organize the next day around itself. The world does not know how sacred bedtime is. It treats it as exhaustion. It treats it as collapse. It treats it as the moment one simply stops. But I tell you, bedtime is often a holy interval, a threshold between worlds, a point where the outer loosens and the inner becomes more powerful, a chamber where one may sow deliberately, a gate through which assumption enters the deeper mind with less resistance. This is why so much can be changed, not by force, but by what is quietly accepted here. So feel the reverence of this moment, feel its tenderness, feel that you are not just getting sleepy, you are coming near a gate, The body is becoming still. The senses are fading. Reason is releasing its proud little hold. The critical mind is no longer standing so straight at the door, and the subconscious, that deep receiving ground, is opening. If you understand this, then you no longer treat the night casually. You do not simply fall into whatever mood the day left behind. You become intentional, but gently so, not intense, not strained, just faithful. Faithful to the state you wish to impress, faithful to the room you wish to sleep in, faithful to the self you wish to awaken as. For most people sleep as the old identity. They sleep as the one who has not received. They sleep as the one still calculating. They sleep as the one still doubting. They sleep as the one still hurt. They sleep as the one still waiting for tomorrow to explain everything. And then tomorrow comes, and they call it fate. But it was mood carried through the gate. It was state impressed in the chamber. It was the old self put to sleep, and then awakened again. So let tonight be different. Tonight you do not sleep as the old man. Tonight you do not sleep as the old woman. Tonight you do not sleep as the one whose story is still unresolved. Tonight you sleep as one inwardly resolved. Even if the world has not fully shown it, even if the bridge is not yet visible, even if the facts still wear yesterday's clothing, still you may sleep as the one who has accepted. That is the holy use of night. That is the creative use of sleep. This moment matters. Let that settle into you very deeply now. This moment matters, not because you must make something dramatic happen, but because the chamber is open, because the body is ready, because the senses are dimming, because the mind is loosening, because the deeper self is nearer to receiving than it has been all day. And in such a moment, you may plant something real, not a wish cast upward, a state received inwardly, not a plea, an acceptance, not a performance, a quiet entering. As you listen now, perhaps already softer and heavier than before, feel the rightness of using this time well, not by straining to think correctly, not by trying to hold every word, only by letting the right atmosphere gather. Let the fulfilled state come near as the body grows quiet. Let the old urgency fall away as the senses fade. Let the last mood of the night be truer than the rest of the day. Let the subconscious receive not the old fear, but the new dwelling. That is enough, more than enough. Sleep is not passive. Sleep is fertile. This night can plant something real. And because it can, you may let the old self stop speaking now and begin, very quietly, to draw nearer to the fulfilled one who will be the one to cross the threshold into sleep. Now let us go a little deeper into the feeling of the desired state. For many imagine that to accept a desire is merely to touch it for a moment in imagination and then return to the old self as though nothing inward had changed. But a state, if it is to produce, must become more than an emotional visit. It must become a dwelling. It must begin to feel like a residence of consciousness, a room in which you live, not a chamber into which you step for a few blessed minutes before going back to sleep as the old one. This is why I say again that a state is not merely a passing feeling. It is a room, a house, a dwelling place. It has its own air, its own light, its own tone, its own assumptions, its own way of reading the world. In one room, everything means delay. In another, everything means movement. In one room, silence means rejection. In another, silence has no power to disturb. In one room, the desire seems far away. In another, it is already included in the feeling of self. The room matters because the room determines how life is inwardly received. Most people, when they first learn these teachings, do something beautiful but incomplete. They visit the desired state. They enter it in imagination. They feel it for a little while. They touch relief. They taste possession. They let the heart believe for 10 minutes, perhaps 20, perhaps during prayer, perhaps just before sleep. And then when the imaginal act is over, they quietly go back to the old room. They return to the house of waiting. They return to the familiar chamber of not yet. They wake up there. They move through the day there. They react from there. And then they wonder why the desire remains only a vision and has not yet solidified into life. It is because they visited. They did not dwell. And there is all the difference in the world between those two things. A man may admire a house every evening and still not live in it. He may enter it, walk through it, feel its warmth, notice its beauty, even sit in its stillness. But if he leaves each night and returns to his old dwelling, that admired place has not yet become home. So too with the fulfilled desire. If you enter it only in moments of practice, but keep your identity in the old room, then the desire remains an honored guest, not an inward resident. What matters is not that you touch the state for a moment. What matters is that you sleep inside it. This is the deeper use of the night. The night is not only for glimpsing fulfillment, it is for yielding yourself to it deeply enough that the fulfilled state becomes your bed, your room, your atmosphere, your inward home. You are not meant merely to say, "How lovely it would be if this were true," and then carry the old identity under the covers. No, you are meant to let the fulfilled self become the one who lies down, the one who breathes, the one who drifts, the one who crosses the threshold into sleep. This is why the desired state must feel like a dwelling, not a performance, not a flash, not a mood, a place, a real inward place, a room where your deeper self says, "Yes, I know this place. I know the air here. I know how the body feels here. I know how thoughts sound here. I know how life is interpreted here. I know who I am here." The old room may still call to you for a time. That is natural. You have lived there long. You know its furniture. You know its shadows. You know where the old thoughts sit and how the old feelings enter. But now another room is being prepared by dwelling. And the more often you return, the more familiar it becomes. The more often you sleep there, the more it ceases to feel borrowed and begins to feel your own. This is what I want for you, that the desired state ceases to be something you merely admire from a distance and becomes the room in which you inwardly live. That the fulfilled desire ceases to be a picture you visit and becomes the house of your identity. That when you think of it, it no longer feels like that thing I hope for, but rather, this is where I belong now. Can you feel how quiet and powerful that is? Not forcing, not begging, not performing belief, simply inhabiting. There is something deeply holy in that word. To inhabit, to live within, to make your home. The fulfilled desire must become your inward address. And once it becomes your inward address, then the phrase harden into fact is no longer mysterious. Of course it hardens into fact. Whatever lives stably in you seeks form. Whatever is inwardly dwelt in begins to organize outer life around itself. Whatever remains in consciousness with enough continuity, enough acceptance, enough naturalness, begins to clothe itself in visibility. That is law. The world takes shape around your dwelling. The stable inner room becomes the pattern for the outer house of events. So then the question is not only, did I imagine it? The deeper question is, did I stay there? Did I let it receive me? Did I continue in it long enough that it began to feel like home? For that is how the invisible becomes convincing to the deeper self, not by one bright moment alone, but by repeated residence. And sleep is one of the most merciful ways to deepen that residence. Because in sleep you stop arguing. In sleep you stop checking. In sleep the mind ceases its little inspections. In sleep you can remain without effort if you have entered the right room beforehand. That is why I say again, do not merely touch the state and then leave it at the bedside. Carry it in with you. Let it be the room you enter as consciousness dims. Let it be the house in which you lie down. Let it be the atmosphere around the last feeling of the night. Let it hold you as you drift. Let the fulfilled self be the one who sleeps. Many have thought that the important thing was to feel the desire intensely, but intensity alone may still be a visit. What matters is residence. If the desire feels inwardly inhabited, if it begins to feel like your place, your room, your natural environment, then something essential is happening. The subconscious is beginning to accept it not as a dramatic possibility, but as a dwelling. And what is accepted as dwelling tends, in time, to become fact. This is why what lives in you stably becomes real. Not what you admire occasionally, not what you beg for once a day, not what you perform for a few moments. What lives in you, what stays, what remains, what is slept in, what is returned to until the whole inward being begins to call it home. So let the desire fulfilled become less like a vision on a distant hill and more like a room in which you stand now. Let it have walls, air, silence, familiarity. Let your breathing happen there. Let your self-concept happen there. Let the last thoughts of the night happen there. Let the body become heavy there. Let the old room recede not because you attacked it, but because you have found another place to live. And if tonight as you near sleep, you can feel even faintly that the desired state is becoming less like a place you visit and more like a place that receives you, then much has already begun. For dwelling is the bridge between imagination and fact. Dwelling gives continuity to the state. Dwelling gives weight to the assumption. Dwelling makes it natural. And what becomes natural? What becomes settled, what becomes home, is already far along the path of hardening into fact. So let this understanding rest very gently in you now. The fulfilled desire must become your house within. You may leave visiting behind and begin inhabiting. And what lives in you in a stable way, what is dwelt in, what is slept in, what becomes your inward residence, is precisely what the world, in its own appointed hour, must finally show. Now let me make the practice so simple that the tired mind cannot turn it into labor. For when men hear of imagination, they often make it too large. They think they must construct a grand inner drama, a long procession of scenes, many details, many movements, much effort. They believe the imaginal act must be complicated in order to be powerful. But this is not so. The deeper mind does not require a lengthy performance. It requires one living impression, one short fulfilled moment, one inward act that implies the thing is already done. So tonight, I do not ask you for a great mental pageant. I ask you for one simple fulfilled scene, small, true, finished, already accomplished. A single moment that would naturally take place after the desire had already come to pass. This matters greatly because the imaginal act must come from the end, not from the middle. If you imagine yourself trying to get, trying to fix, trying to move the outer world, then you are still dramatizing the problem. But if you enter a scene that could only happen after fulfillment, then consciousness receives the right instruction. It feels the completed thing, not the effort toward it. So do not imagine the journey. Imagine the arrival. Do not imagine the struggle. Imagine the settled fact. Do not imagine the door opening. Imagine yourself already inside, and make the scene short enough that sleep may easily carry it. One phrase heard, one paper held, one hand shaken, one look of quiet certainty, one little moment that says, without explanation, it has happened. This is all you need. And now understand something very important. The scene is not to be watched from a distance as though you were observing another person in a play. You are not in the audience tonight. You are not meant to look at yourself from the outside. You are meant to be there, within it, from the first person point of view. See with your own inward eyes. Hear with your own inward ears. Feel with your own inward body. Let the imaginal act happen around you and through you, not before you like a picture on a wall. If you imagine yourself from the outside, you remain slightly separate from the state. But if you enter from within, you begin to occupy it. And occupation is what matters. Dwelling is what matters. The body, the breath, the inward identity must say, this is happening to me now in imagination, and therefore it is accepted at the level where reality begins. Let the scene be natural. Natural. That is far more important than emotional spectacle. Do not strive for excitement. Do not try to manufacture a thrill. The fulfilled scene often carries a very quiet tone, more relief than fireworks, more softness than intensity, more of course than how incredible. You are not trying to astonish yourself. You are trying to let the deeper self recognize a room that it can live in. So if the body softens, that is good. If the breath grows easier, that is good. If the shoulders loosen a little, that is good. If the mind stops straining to make something happen, that is very good. For all of these are signs that the imaginal act is moving from concept into feeling, from thought into accepted atmosphere. Now let me give you some very simple examples, not so that you become dependent upon my images, but so that the principle becomes clear. You may hear a trusted voice say, very simply, it's done now. Nothing more, just that. Perhaps the words are spoken gently, almost matter-of-factly, and you, hearing them, feel the quiet release in the body. The matter is no longer hanging over you. It is done now. Stay there. Hear it once or twice. Let the words land. Let the body answer with relief. Or you may imagine holding a paper in your hands, a letter, a document, a statement, a note, whatever fits your desire. You need not read pages. Perhaps you only see one confirming line, a line that tells you what you needed to know, a line that means the desire has become fact. Feel the paper in your hands. Feel your fingers touching it. Feel the stillness in the body as you hold proof not with shock, but with calm recognition. Or perhaps you hear someone say, I knew this would work out for you. Notice the beauty of that. The work is already over in such a scene. It is not perhaps it will. It is not I hope it does. It is after the fact. I knew this would work out for you. Hear that. Let it be spoken to you. Let your body answer not with astonishment, but with the simple feeling of, yes, it did. You may imagine looking quietly at some sign of fulfillment and feeling no need to chase, No need to hurry, no need to argue, just a calm certainty. A paper, a number, a letter, a word, a face, whatever naturally implies the desire has already moved into form. Let the certainty be quiet. Let it feel settled. Perhaps you are being congratulated after the fact. Someone is smiling. Someone is shaking your hand. Someone is saying, "I'm so happy for you," and you are not straining in the scene. You are receiving it as one to whom it now belongs. Hear the congratulations, feel the handshake, feel your own response, not dramatic, just true. Or perhaps the scene is even quieter than that. Perhaps you are simply sitting in a chair, or standing by a window, or lying in bed, and feeling the matter is settled. No one else is there. No great event is occurring, only relief, only the deep exhale of one who no longer has to carry the old question. That too is a perfect imaginal act. Do not despise quiet scenes. The deeper mind often loves them most. What matters is not complexity. What matters is implication. The scene must imply fulfillment. It must carry the emotional logic of after, not before. And once you have found your small true scene, do not keep changing it. Stay with it. Return to it softly. Enter it again. Let it become familiar. The mind that keeps seeking a better scene often reveals that it still believes the power lies in novelty, but the power lies in occupancy. A small scene faithfully entered is worth far more than 10 elaborate scenes admired and abandoned. Now, let the body accompany the imaginal act. This matters more than many realize. Do not let the scene remain only in the head. Let the body begin to... Let the jaw soften a little more. Let the chest unguard. Let the belly stop bracing. Let the breath say, without words, "It is all right now." The body is part of the prayer. The body can either contradict the scene or agree with it. So tonight let it agree. Let it become the body of the one for whom the matter is settled. That is enough. You need not hold the scene for long. You need not maintain perfect visual clarity. You need not worry if the image fades a little as sleep comes. In fact, if you fall asleep in the scene, that is success. Do not think you have failed because the scene dissolved into sleep. No, that is often the best outcome of all. For the point is not to keep the scene bright for the waking mind. The point is to let it enter the deeper self as you drift. If sleep comes while the fulfilled atmosphere is still near, then the scene has already... You have carried the right state through the gate. So be free of the fear that you must do this perfectly. You do not. You need only do it truly enough that the body begins to soften and the old self begins to loosen. And remember always, one small true scene is enough. One sentence heard, one paper held, one handshake felt, one quiet smile, one calm knowing, one little after-the-fact moment. But the law does not require complication. It requires acceptance. The imaginal act is only the doorway by which acceptance becomes easier. So tonight, choose the simple doorway. Enter it gently. Stay there as long as it feels natural. And if sleep comes, let it come there. Perhaps now you can already feel the relief of that simplicity. I can do this tonight. Yes, I can do this tonight. It does. A small true scene is enough. A scene already fulfilled. A scene entered from within. A scene that lets the body know it is done. Let that be the mercy of this hour. Not labor, not complexity. Only one little open door into the fulfilled state. And through that door, very softly, you may pass into sleep. Now let me give you something simple enough to carry across the threshold of sleep. Not a long, only a small inward lullaby, a phrase or two that can hold the state for you as the waking mind grows dim. For inner speech is continuous prayer. Whether you notice it or not, something in you is always speaking. Even in silence there is a tone, a commentary, a private whisper of self to self. Through the day it mutters its little verdicts, its old conclusions, its remembered fears, its habitual identity. And at night when the body grows still and the senses soften, that inward speech becomes even more important. For what is repeated in drowsiness tends to become atmosphere. It stops being only words. It becomes climate. It becomes the air in the room of consciousness. It becomes the subtle weather in which the subconscious rests. That is why I would have you choose your inward words carefully in this hour, not with fear, but with tenderness. Not because the phrase is magical in itself, but because of the feeling it carries. The value of the phrase lies not in the number of times it is spoken, but in the inward condition that accompanies it. Spoken as strain, it remains near the surface. Spoken as settlement, it descends. Spoken as pleading, it keeps the desire outside. Spoken as acceptance, it draws the desire inward until it begins to feel like home. So do not repeat as one trying to make heaven here. Do not repeat as one arguing against a great inward doubt. Repeat, if you repeat at all, as one laying the head down upon a pillow already prepared, as one settling into a room already his, as one no longer trying to persuade the desire to come closer, but allowing the self to grow quiet enough to feel that it is already accepted. This is the spirit of the inward lullaby, not only falling softly into what is already true in consciousness. You may use very few words. In fact, fewer is often better. The drowsy mind loves simplicity. It does not want to carry speeches. It wants one soft thread to follow down into sleep. One little sentence that feels like home. One short inward touch that says everything necessary without stirring the mind too much. So let these phrases be offered to you like little keys. Choose one or two, or let them blend into one another very softly. It is done. I am already the one. I rest in the fulfilled state. My desire is already accepted. I sleep in the wish fulfilled. It is natural now. Feel how different these are from asking. They do not reach. They do not strain. They do not plead. They settle. They quiet the old self. They close the gap. They are not trying, and that is why they are useful. Take the first one if you like. It is done. How simple. How deep. It is done. Not, may it be done. Not, perhaps it will be done. Not, I hope it is being done. It is done. When spoken rightly, those words do not produce tension. They end tension. They carry the tone of completion. They say to the body, you no longer need to labor over. They say to the deeper self, the matter has been accepted in consciousness. You may rest now, or perhaps this one fits more naturally tonight. I am already the one. This is a beautiful phrase because it shifts the center away from the desire as object and toward identity as cause. I am already the one who has received, the one who is chosen, the one who no longer stands outside the door, the one who is not. Let that be said without force, like a quiet recollection, not trying to become, remembering being. Or perhaps the night wants something even softer. I rest in the fulfilled state. This one carries peace in it. It does not ask the body to generate. It asks the body to rest. It says that the state is not something to hold above your head, but something to lie down in. I rest in the fulfilled state, not I work in it. Let the phrase itself become a mattress under thought. Let it receive you. Or perhaps this one will soothe the old anxious mind. My desire is already accepted, not postponed, not under review, not outside, already accepted. Accepted in the only place from which visible life takes pattern, accepted before the world reports it, accepted before the senses approve, accepted before the bridge is fully seen. It removes the need to keep arguing your case inwardly. It suggests that the deeper self has already opened its hand. Or perhaps the phrase that belongs most to the night itself is this: I sleep in the wish fulfilled. What a tender sentence that is. It does not ask you to maintain a daytime sharpness. It does not ask you to stay mentally alert. It asks only that you cross the threshold of sleep in the right room. Not I admire it for a little while. I sleep in it. I let it be the bed. I let it be the room. I let it be the air I breathe as the world fades. And then there is this. It is natural now. Such a quiet sentence. Such a deep one. It is natural now. Not spectacular. Not distant. Not extraordinary. Natural. The body understands naturalness more quickly than the mind understands. Natural to stop checking. Natural to let the old room lose its authority. Natural to sleep as the fulfilled self. It is natural now. You need not use them all. One is enough if it truly fits. Sometimes the one you choose tonight will not be the one you choose tomorrow. That is all right. The purpose is not to build a rigid system of words. The purpose is to find the phrase that carries the right feeling into the drowsy state. What matters is the current beneath it, and that current is acceptance. Always acceptance. If you speak the phrase as a plea, it keeps you outside. If you speak it as settlement, it carries you in. So listen to your own tone inwardly. Let the phrase soften the body rather than tighten it. Let it quiet the old self rather than provoke a struggle with it. Let it feel like descent, not effort. If the phrase makes you strain, if it makes you feel like you are trying to force sleep and fulfillment at once, then perhaps make it smaller, softer, slower. You are not required to repeat ceaselessly. You are not required to hold the phrase with clenched attention. You are not required to stay awake to prove faithfulness. The phrase is not there to keep you alert. It is there to carry the state downward as you drift. So perhaps say it once on the exhale, "It is done," or "I rest in the fulfilled state." Then let there be a little silence. Let the body hear it. Let the chest hear it. Let the breath hear it. Then perhaps again, if it feels kind, "My desire is already accepted," or "I sleep in the wish fulfilled," or "It is natural now." And then silence again. The phrase should begin to feel less like language and more like atmosphere, less like something you are doing. A lullaby is not a speech. It is not an argument. It is a repeated gentleness. It gives the mind less and less to hold on to until the mind stops trying to hold altogether. That is what we want here. Not more activity, less. Not more management, less. Not more words, only enough words to let sleep keep the right mood. Now perhaps you can feel the comfort of that. You already have something simple. You do not need a great structure to recite. You need only one little inward ribbon of truth, soft enough to follow into sleep. And so if I were to leave you with a cluster tonight, I would leave you with this, repeated not urgently, but like a quiet rocking: "It is done. I am already the one. I rest in the fulfilled state. My desire is already accepted. I sleep in the wish fulfilled. It is natural now. Let them blur at the edges if they wish. The deeper mind does not need a sharp recital. It needs the feeling. It is done. And because it is done, I am already the one. And because I am already the one, I rest in the fulfilled state. And because I rest in it, my desire is already accepted. And because it is accepted, I sleep in the wish fulfilled. And because I sleep there, it is natural now. Only falling inward, only descending, only letting the phrase become a climate. This phrase, or one like it, can become your inward weather. It can become the tone of the room in which you sleep. It can become the new background voice that replaces the old muttering of delay, fear, or checking. And because inner speech is continuous prayer, this small change is not small at all. It is the replacing of one climate with another. So take this comfort with you now. You already have enough. Enough to carry into the night. Enough to repeat softly. Enough to let the deeper self begin agreeing. You do not need to force. You need only fall into it. And the phrase, if chosen rightly and held lightly, will help you do exactly that. Now let me speak plainly of one of the quietest ways in which men undo their own assumption. They assume nobly at night. They fall asleep nearer to the wish fulfilled than they have been all day. And then morning comes, and before the body has fully awakened, before the new state has had time to breathe into the day, they begin to check. They look for proof. They scan the world. They measure the visible. They ask the mirror whether it has already obeyed. And in that one movement, so ordinary and so common, they begin to leave the state. This is one of the great, not some grand denial of the law, simply checking, quiet checking, habitual checking. The old reflex of turning to the outer world and asking, has it happened yet? How innocent it seems, how reasonable it seems, and yet how costly it can be. A man imagines wealth, sleeps in relief, and then wakes to inspect the figures. A woman imagines reconciliation, sleeps in peace, and then wakes to inspect the silence. Another imagines health, sleeps in the feeling of restored life, and then wakes to search the body for evidence. Another imagines freedom, sleeps inwardly released, and then wakes to count the visible chains. That is checking. And checking means, more often than not, that one has quietly returned to the old self. Because the fulfilled self does not rise in the morning asking the world for permission to continue being fulfilled. The fulfilled self does not say, let me first see whether I may remain faithful. The fulfilled self begins from itself, but the checking self begins from appearances. And the moment you begin from appearances, you have already stepped out of the new room and back into the old one. This must be understood with tenderness, not fear. I am not saying you must never look at anything in the world. I am not teaching superstition. I am teaching order. The issue is the inner movement behind the seeing. If you look in order to find out whether your assumption may continue, you are no longer living from the assumption. You are asking the world to tell you who you are, and that is the old self's way. Checking says, I am still waiting. Checking says, I am not yet sure. Checking says, the outer world still has the authority to decide whether I may remain in this state. Checking says, the thing is still outside me, and I must look there to know whether it is coming. And because the law is exact, the state of still waiting is reflected just as faithfully as the state of fulfilled possession. If you keep returning to waiting, the world returns waiting. If you keep returning to not yet, the world returns not yet. If you keep scanning for signs, the world gives you more of the psychology of signs. That is why checking creates more waiting, not because looking is cursed, but because the spirit of checking is separation. The spirit of checking assumes distance. The spirit of checking assumes the matter is not yet inwardly settled, and so it interrupts continuity. It breaks the flow between the state entered at night and the self that wakes in the morning. It divides the inner movement. It says, in effect, I was fulfilled in imagination, but now let me see whether the world agrees before I continue. That is the fracture. That is the subtle disloyalty. That is how continuity is lost. Many assume beautifully at night and betray that assumption before breakfast, not because they are wicked, not because the law is fragile, but because they have not yet seen how much checking costs them. Checking pulls you out. It pulls you out of the inward room and back into the corridor where the old self waits to reclaim you. And because it is such a quiet habit, so blended with ordinary waking life, people rarely recognize it for what it is. They call it being realistic. They call it just seeing how things stand. They call it prudence. But if the motive is, let me see if I may still believe, then it is not prudence. It is a return to the old arrangement of. Now let us go a little deeper into why this matters so much. The visible world is often old echo. What you see in the morning is not always the fresh report of your latest assumption. It is very often yesterday's state made visible, last week's tension, last month's fear, the long-held room of identity clothed in event. So if you check too soon, you are consulting history and mistaking it for present truth. That is why people become disheartened unnecessarily. They assume at night, then wake and look at the old echo. And because the old echo has not yet changed, they say, nothing is happening. But something may already have happened at the level of cause. The seed may already be planted, the room may already be chosen, the inward self may already have shifted. Yet the old echo is still sounding. If at that moment you bow to the echo and take it as final, you re-enter the state that created the old echo in the first place. Do you see the trap? It is not that the law has failed, it is that checking keeps handing your identity back to what is still only catching up. The mirror is always later than the face. The echo is always later than the voice. The harvest is always later than the planting. If you keep demanding immediate proof from the visible, you keep privileging the late over the first, the echo over the voice, the mirror over the face. And that reverses the law in your own mind. It makes you once again a servant of appearances rather than the one who chooses within. So tonight I would have you feel a new mercy. You do not need immediate evidence. You do not need to wake hunting for signs. You do not need to ask. You do not need to search the mirror. You may let the world catch up. You may let the visible remain for a little while, an old report. You may let the old echo fade without hurrying to replace it through nervous observation. How much strain would leave the body if this were truly accepted? How much mental noise would cease? How many mornings would become gentler? How many nights would cease to be undone by dawn? Checking me pulls me out. Checking me pulls me out, not because there is something evil in the act itself, but because it tempts me to relocate my identity in the visible. And identity must remain inward if the desire is to harden into fact. So what then is the wiser way? To wake and begin inwardly before the world is consulted, to remember the state before the senses report, to let the new room greet the morning before the old echo is allowed to speak, to handle the day, yes, but not from the habit of scanning for proof, to see what must be seen without making it master, to remember that the world visible often comes second and speaks late. No, you do not need immediate signs. No, you do not need proof before peace. No, you do not need to check whether the law is at work. The law is at work when the state is accepted. The law is faithful whether you inspect it or not. The seed grows whether you dig at the soil or not. So let the checking habit lose some of its authority tonight. See it for what it is, a return to the old self, a quiet slipping back into waiting, a little act of distrust toward the fulfilled state. And once seen, it can be softened, not with harshness, with understanding. When you feel the urge to check, let that urge itself remind you of the old room. Let it become I do not need to look for signs immediately. I do not need to ask the world to move before I remain. I do not need to scan the mirror. I can let the world catch up. There is something profoundly restful in that. It restores dignity to the inward life. It gives the soul permission to remain without outer applause. It stops the nervous little measuring that keeps the desire forever just ahead of you. It lets the fulfilled self breathe. Not blindness to the world, not denial of the world, but freedom from the habit of interrogating it. Freedom from waking in inventory. Freedom from measuring whether the invisible is already visible enough to deserve your faithfulness. Let the invisible be first. Let the accepted state remain first. Let the world arrive in its order. And if in the morning the old urge rises again, remember this gently. I do not need to check. But I do not have to leave the room because the mirror is slow. I may remain. I may rest. I may let the outer follow the inner, as it always must, when I no longer interrupt the process with the old habit of looking away from consciousness and back toward fear. Now let me speak to you of the bridge, for once a desire has been accepted inwardly, once it has been felt, once it has been carried into the deeper chambers of self, men think that if the desire is real, its arrival must look obvious from the very beginning. They expect a straight road, a visible line, a sequence they can understand while it is happening. But the law is deeper than the surface mind, and so the way by which assumption becomes fact is often hidden while it is unfolding. This is what I mean by the bridge of hardening. The visible fact is not born all at once in most cases. It gathers, it takes on density. It forms through a chain of events, moods, meetings, impulses, delays, openings, rearrangements, and movements that may seem ordinary when viewed separately. But together they are the bridge. Together they are the world taking shape around the accepted state. Together they are the invisible hardening into visible fact. So let me say this very clearly. You do not need to know how it will harden into fact. You do not need to know the road in advance. You do not need to see the whole bridge while you are still on the first plank. The law knows how to build the bridge. And because it knows, you are spared the burden of trying to arrange every detail with the surface mind. Now this is where many become troubled. They assume the fulfilled state, perhaps beautifully, perhaps sincerely, and then they begin asking at once, through whom will it come? By what event? In what order? Through which conversation? By which opportunity? Through which letter? Which amount? Which door? Which exact path? And because the mind wants visible control, it becomes impatient with any movement that does not look like the expected channel. But I tell you, the bridge of incidents does not always look related when it begins. It may include a delay that later proves to have been protection. It may include a disappointment that turns out to be redirection. It may include a meeting that seemed accidental, a correction that seemed small, a conversation that seemed unimportant, a detour that looked like obstruction, a closed door that was quietly turning you toward the right door, an unexpected opening that you had not even considered because your conscious mind had chosen some narrower path. This is why you must not choose the channel too tightly. Do not say, it must come only this way, through this person, by this event, in this sequence, by this date, with this visible logic. The conscious mind is too small to direct the whole bridge. It knows too little. It sees too near. It is always tempted to worship what it can already imagine. But the law works from a deeper wisdom than your present reasoning can command. It knows how to touch people you did not think of. It knows how to rearrange events you have not yet seen. It knows how to make one small correction become the cause of another, and that another, and that another, until what was assumed within stands before you in the world of fact. This should bring you relief, not because nothing matters, but because not everything is your burden. Your part is inward. The mechanism is not. Your work is acceptance. The law's work is the bridge, and how often men suffer because they try to do both. They accept for a moment, then immediately begin directing the machinery. They assume the end, then rush to supervise the means. They declare it done, and then demand to know at once through what exact staircase the done thing will descend into form. This mixture of assumption and control creates strain. It creates checking. It creates impatience. And impatience is often only hidden distrust. So I would have you understand persistence rightly. Persistence does not mean nervous repetition. It does not mean forcing the desire forward by mental pressure. It does not mean staring at the horizon, demanding visible movement. Persistence is fidelity, quiet fidelity, remaining loyal to the accepted state while life builds what life must build around it. Persistence means I do not leave the room simply because the hallway looks unfamiliar. Persistence means I do not abandon the seed simply because the earth is still dark above it. Persistence means I do not call the bridge broken because I cannot yet see its full design. The law knows how to construct what the mind would only tangle. Think of how little the seed knows of the harvest. Think of how little the branch knows of the fruit while winter still appears. Think of how little the echo reveals about the moment the voice first went out into the valley. Yet all of these obey process. All of these move under law. And so it is with your assumption. Once accepted, it is not left idle. The world begins its rearranging, the bridge begins, the hardening begins, the invisible, without fanfare, begins seeking form. And because that process is so often quiet at first, men call it nothing. That is their mistake. They think only dramatic movement counts as evidence, but the law is often humble in its first steps. A thought occurs, a letter arrives, a plan changes, a door closes, a person remembers you, a correction is made, a conversation happens. A delay shifts one meeting into the timing that makes another possible. And because the conscious mind loves spectacle, it overlooks the holiness of the ordinary. Yet the bridge is often made of ordinary planks. This is why you must learn not to interpret too soon. If a delay comes, do not at once call it failure. If a route closes, do not at once call it denial. If something unexpected appears, do not reject it merely because it was not your chosen channel. If the bridge looks strange, let it be strange for a while. You are not required to understand it while it is being laid. You are required only to remain loyal to the end. This loyalty is one of the quietest powers in the whole law. It says, whatever moves, I remain in the fulfilled state. Whatever shifts, I do not run back into fear. Whatever door closes, I do not assume the end has changed. Whatever delay appears, I do not identify again as one who is denied. I remain. That is fidelity. That is persistence without tension. And because it is without tension, it can be lived. It can accompany sleep. It can accompany the day. It can accompany uncertainty without collapsing into control. It does not need to know the mechanism. It trusts the law's intelligence more than the mind's need to map everything. The bridge of hardening is lawful, not chaotic. It only appears chaotic when seen from too near. From within the process, the incidents may look scattered. From the end, they often look inevitable. How many have looked back and said, I thought that was the setback, and it was the turn. I thought that was the loss, and it was the opening. I thought that silence meant nothing was happening, and behind it everything was moving. This is so often the way, not always loudly, not always quickly, but deeply, lawfully, quietly. The state accepted within begins summoning the forms, people, timings, and arrangements that belong to it. So tonight, let this free you a little more from the torment of mechanism. You do not need to stand over the bridge while it builds. You do not need to know which hand will lay which plank. You do not need to choose the channel. You do not need to demand that the path look simple before you can remain in the end. No, your part is to dwell, to accept, to return, to remain inwardly faithful. The law's part is to harden that inward acceptance into fact, through whatever sequence of life it chooses. And life is often wiser than the reasoning mind. It sees more doors, it knows more people, it can use more roads, it can turn what looked irrelevant into what becomes central. It can make what looked like a no into the hidden beginning of the yes. So let there be more trust in you now. Not vague hope, trust in law. Trust that the accepted state is not sitting idle because the senses have not yet reported the end. Trust that hardening is occurring even when it is not yet visible. Trust that one who remains in the fulfilled room is already allowing the right bridge to form. Trust that your desire does not depend upon your ability to predict its arrival. This is one of the deepest mercies in all my teaching. You are not required to understand the mechanism of manifestation in order to benefit from it. You are only required to remain faithful to the end. The farmer need not know every hidden movement in the soil. He need not oversee each root. He need only plant rightly, tend wisely, and refrain from digging up what was meant to grow. In the same way, your desire does not need your anxious supervision. It needs your continued inward loyalty. So rest in this tonight. I do not need to know how it will harden into fact. The law knows the bridge. The law knows the route. The law knows the timing. My part is to remain. My part is to stop interfering through fear, checking, and over-direction. My part is to let the end be enough. And if you can do that, even gently, even imperfectly, then much of the burden leaves the shoulders, much of the restless planning leaves the mind, much of the nervous urgency leaves the breath. And what remains is the quiet, mature relationship to the law that produces real results, inward acceptance, faithful dwelling, and a willingness to let life arrange what the surface mind was never meant to control. So, let the bridge be built, let the strange route be strange, let the unseen mechanism remain unseen for a while. Let the visible fact gather its density through whatever delays, detours, meetings, corrections, and openings belong to it. Only remain, only dwell. Only stay loyal to the room you have chosen. That is enough, more than enough. And in that enoughness, the law is free to do what it has always done. Take the accepted state and harden it, by its own wise sequence, into the world called fact. Now let me tell you something that many overlook because it is too simple, too quiet, and not dramatic enough for the restless mind. The true sign that manifestation is nearing is often not intensity, it is naturalness. This surprises many. They think that if the desire were really close, they would feel more excitement, more emotional force, more electricity, more signs of spiritual drama. They think fulfillment must feel like some great inward event, some thrilling sensation that overtakes the whole being. But that is not usually the deepest sign. The deeper sign is often that the desire begins to feel ordinary, familiar, less like a miracle, more like a fact, not yet fully seen, but already inwardly accepted. Naturalness is greater than intensity. Let that settle deeply into you. Naturalness is greater than intensity. For what the subconscious accepts most easily is not what you admire from a distance, but what feels like home. Not what dazzles you for an hour, but what seems quietly appropriate to you. Not what sends the nerves into excitement, but what the deeper self can wear without resistance. The wish fulfilled, when it truly begins to enter consciousness, often loses some of its spectacle. It becomes less theatrical, less far away, less emotionally noisy. And that is not a bad sign. It is often a very holy one. When something is accepted deeply, it stops feeling foreign. It stops feeling extraordinary. It begins to feel in a strange and lovely way, almost obvious. And the mind that still worships intensity may mistake that for weakness. It may say, perhaps I am losing the feeling. Perhaps I do not care enough. Perhaps the imaginal act is no longer powerful because it feels calmer now. But often the opposite is true. It feels calmer because it is going deeper. It feels less surprising because it is becoming more natural. It feels less like a desired object and more like an inward identity. This is why I would have you stop measuring progress by emotional heat alone. Heat may accompany some moments. Yes, a first glimpse of the state may thrill you. A sudden opening may delight you. There is nothing wrong in that. But what endures, what stabilizes, what hardens into fact, is not excitement, it is naturalness. It is the quiet point at which the fulfilled state no longer feels like something you are trying to believe and begins to feel like something you simply are. Now notice what this naturalness sounds like inwardly. There is less hunger in it, less reaching, less trying to force tomorrow, less need to mention the desire every few minutes to prove to yourself that you still believe. There is less urgency, less drama, less fascinated looking toward the outer world, and more peace, more of course, more restful inner consent. The old self is hungry because it feels separate. It reaches because it believes the thing is elsewhere. It dramatizes because distance makes everything feel larger than life. But the fulfilled self is quieter. It has less need to shout because it no longer feels excluded. It does not have to keep crying out, will it happen? Because it has begun to feel that inwardly something is already settled. That is why peace is often a sign of nearness, not the peace of giving up. Not the peace of becoming numb, the peace of inward possession, the peace of one who no longer stands in such violent relation to the desire. This is why I connect naturalness to what I have called Sabbath. Sabbath is not merely a day, it is a state of inward rest after the imaginal act has been accepted. It is the stillness of completed inner work. It is the mood of one who no longer feels compelled to keep forcing, arguing, checking, or begging. In Sabbath, the soul rests because something in it knows that the seed has been planted, the room has been chosen, the new identity has been admitted. There is less movement because there is less division, and this Sabbath often feels very simple, very quiet, almost too quiet for the mind that still expects fireworks. But quietness is not emptiness. Quietness is often depth. A lake may look still on the surface, while holding great depth below. So too with the accepted desire. When it begins to feel simple, when it begins to lose some of its emotional noise, when it begins to seem less like an extraordinary event and more like an inward fact, that may mean it is entering the Sabbath state. It is no longer being entertained as possibility. It is being worn as identity. So do not be troubled if the desire begins to feel less intense and more familiar. Do not assume that less thrill means less power. Do not imagine that dramatic emotion is proof, while simplicity is weakness. The opposite may be true. When it no longer surprises you so much, it may be entering more deeply. When it no longer feels impossible, it may be nearing embodiment. When it no longer makes you inwardly leap, but instead makes you inwardly settle, it may be because the subconscious is beginning to accept it as normal. And normality is one of the greatest signs of all. The world itself is built from normalities, not from things admired as far-off wonders, but from things accepted as part of life. The subconscious does not most readily produce what you think of as dazzling and distant. It produces what you have naturalized, what you have made inwardly ordinary, what you have ceased resisting, what feels like it belongs to you without argument. This is why I would have you bless the growing simplicity of the fulfilled state. If it begins to feel more natural than emotional, bless it. If it begins to feel less dramatic and more settled, bless it. If you find yourself less desperate, less eager to check, less startled by the possibility, bless it. If you begin to say inwardly, almost without effort, of course, bless it, that little phrase carries enormous power. Of course it is done. Of course I am already the one. Of course the bridge is forming. Of course the world must follow. Of course I may rest. That tone is so different from craving. It is so different from the nervous, grasping self. It has dignity in it, completion in it. It does not fight for the thing. It rests in the inward appropriateness of it. And that is the tone of naturalness. A fulfilled desire begins, in time, to feel less like a blazing object of longing and more like a room you already know. You stop peering at it from a distance. You stop emotionally circling it. You stop needing to generate an experience around it. You just know it differently. The body knows it differently. The breath knows it differently. The inner speech knows it differently. There is less strain, more ease, less please, more yes, less when, more already, less how, more rest. That is a beautiful sign, a true sign, and perhaps one of the most merciful ones, because it means you do not need to exhaust yourself trying to stay spiritually excited. You do not need to maintain some high emotional flame. You do not need to prove the state by intensity. You need only let it become natural. That is enough. More than enough. No, you do not need intensity. You need normality. You need the fulfilled state to begin feeling like the way things are with you. And if it feels simple, that can be a very good sign. Indeed, the simpler it feels, the more likely it is that resistance is loosening. The more likely it is that the new state is ceasing to be an admired fantasy and becoming an inhabited reality. And when it stops seeming so far away, it is often very near. So tonight, as you lie there and listen and soften, do not ask only, do I feel strongly enough? Ask instead, does it feel more natural than before? Does the body protest less? Does the inner voice sound calmer? Does the desire seem less distant? Is there more peace? Is there more of course? If so, then something sacred is happening. The room is becoming home. The state is becoming familiar. The fulfilled self is becoming easier to wear. And what becomes natural in consciousness is already moving toward the world called fact. Now let me show you one of the tender mercies of night, one of the most beautiful powers available to you before sleep fully takes you. The day may not have been perfect. You may have drifted. You may have reacted from the old self. A word may have shaken you. A silence may have troubled you. A fact may have tempted you back into fear. You may have checked. You may have wondered. You may have given the old room more of yourself than you wished to. But you do not have to go to bed carrying the whole day exactly as it happened. You do not have to lie down inside the mistakes of the daylight hours. You may revise. This is one of the great mercies of consciousness. Nothing need be left exactly as first received. If imagination helped create the wound, imagination may also heal it. If the day impressed you with old reactions, the night may release those impressions and lay down new ones. Revision is not denial. Revision is not pretending something happened when it did not. In the crude sense, revision is the conscious replacement of the inward meaning of an event. It is the gentle reworking of the day, so that you do not carry into sleep the same old identity that reacted in the old way. How many go to sleep rehearsing what hurt them? They replay the conversation. They hear the tone again. They see the letter again, they feel the checking again, they relive the reaction again, and by doing so they press the old state deeper. They sleep in the bruise, they sleep in the fear, they sleep in the meaning of the old self. But tonight you need not do that. Tonight the day does not get the last word, simply because it happened first. So before sleep takes you wholly, you may look back very gently over the day. Not to accuse yourself, not to catalogue your failures, not to say, I lost the state again, and therefore I am not good at this. No, only to notice where the old self stepped in, where fear answered, where the body tightened, where checking pulled you out, where some thought of old identity returned and began to narrate the world again. Perhaps there was a moment of fear. A letter came, a silence lingered, a number appeared, a person spoke carelessly, a reply did not come. The body remembered an old worry, the heart dipped, the old self said, you see, nothing has changed. Very well. That moment need not be carried into sleep, unchanged. Or perhaps there was a moment of checking. You woke in the morning and turned too quickly to the world. You scanned the facts. You measured the visible. You asked the mirror what had happened before the state had a chance to breathe into the day. Very well. That too need not be carried into sleep as the final version. Or perhaps there was a conversation, outward or inward, in which the old identity returned. The old I am rose again. I am still behind. I am still the one who waits. I am the one for whom it takes so long. Very well, that thought may have appeared, but it need not be the last shape the day leaves in you. This is the use of revision. To take the day, not violently, but lovingly, and rewrite the places where the old self ruled. Not for the sake of fantasy, but for the sake of consciousness. For what you impress before sleep sinks more deeply. And why should you impress the error again when you may replace it with the truth of the fulfilled self? So if there was a moment of fear, see it again now, but differently. See the same moment, yet let the fulfilled self remain. If the letter came and disturbed you, imagine opening it now with calm. Feel the body stay soft. See the hands steady. Let the eyes move over the page without contraction. Perhaps the line you dreaded is gone. Perhaps the meaning has changed. Perhaps the same event is now clothed in another feeling. The point is not the outer mechanics. The point is that you remain in the new state. The fulfilled self does not lose its room because of one envelope, one silence, one delay. So see yourself remaining. If there was a moment of checking, revise it now. See yourself waking differently. Before the eyes go outward, feel yourself inwardly resting in it is done. Instead of searching for proof, imagine yourself remaining in the state. Perhaps you glance at the world, but with a different relationship to it. No hunger, no fear, no need for immediate evidence. Let the body feel the difference. Let the morning be clothed in loyalty rather than in scanning. If there was a conversation that unsettled you, hear it again. But let the fulfilled self answer silently. Let the inward room remain unchanged. The words may come, but they do not move you as before. The old interpretation does not rise. You hear them from another state now. You are not the same one who was shaken. You are the one who remains, and because you remain, the conversation loses its power to impress the deeper mind with the old identity. If there was a thought of the old self, revise that too. Hear it, and then hear another. The old line says, I am still waiting. But the revised self says, no, I am already the one. The old line says, nothing has changed. But the revised self says, the state has changed, and that is enough. The old line says, I always slip back. But the revised self says, I return gently, and returning is strength. Let the new line be simple. Let it feel livable. Let it belong to the fulfilled room. This is what revision does. It does not erase the day like a magician's trick. It changes the inward trace. It changes what the subconscious carries forward. It says, this is no longer how I mean that event. This is no longer the identity I draw from it. This is no longer the room in which that moment shall live. In this way, the day is redeemed, not denied, redeemed. And how precious that is before sleep, for sleep deepens what it receives. Why should it receive the raw old reaction if you can soften and reshape it first? Why should you go to bed carrying the bruise when you can lay down a healing impression instead? Why should you ask tomorrow to begin from the old wound when tonight you may already begin changing the inward story? You do not have to go to bed with the errors of the day. Let that be a deep comfort to you. You do not have to go to bed with the errors of the day. You may correct the imprint before sleep. You may bless the place where you drifted by revising it. You may take the hand of the old self and gently lead it out of the room before night closes. And this makes tomorrow easier. That is one of revision's quiet gifts. The revised moment does not sit in the subconscious as a fresh wound ready to be repeated. It sits there differently. It sits there as the fulfilled self's way of being. So when a similar moment comes tomorrow, you are no longer approaching it from the exact same inner place. Something has been softened. Something has been retrained. Something in you remembers the revised version and more easily remains. That is why revision helps you remain tomorrow, not because it guarantees a perfect day, but because it changes what the deeper self rehearses overnight. The body learns from repeated meaning. The subconscious learns from repeated inner pictures. If you give it again and again the old reaction, it will offer you the old reaction more quickly next time. If you give it the revised reaction, the fulfilled reaction, the quieter and steadier version, then little by little the new self becomes easier to inhabit. What was once practiced at night begins to appear more naturally by day. So tonight, if any little part of the day still stings, do not be afraid of it. Bring it into this softer chamber. Look at it again through the eyes of the fulfilled self. Let the scene change. Let the words change. Let the feeling change. Let the body no longer brace in that memory. Let the new state enter the old moment and redeem it from within. A fear becomes calm. A checking moment becomes trust. A conversation becomes support. An old thought becomes a new I am. A wound becomes a place where the new self remained. And as this happens, something in you begins to understand that the desire is no longer merely a hope for the future. It is becoming the new author of the past as well. The fulfilled state begins to reinterpret what once seemed fixed. That is a very deep thing. It means the old self is losing its hold not only on tomorrow, but on yesterday. And when yesterday no longer rules in the same way, tomorrow becomes much easier to enter from freedom. So let the night be merciful. Let it revise gently. Let it clean the day without accusation. Let it remove from your pillow the old emotional debris. Let it prepare the deeper self for a more faithful morning. The night permits you to rewrite your relation to the desire. Yes, that is one of its sacred uses. You do not have to sleep under the old sentence tonight. You do not have to carry the old reaction into dreams. You may correct the mark before sleeping. You may soften the trace. You may lay down not as the one who lost the state today, but as the one who gently reclaimed it before the night closed. And that is enough, more than enough. For if you do this often, the day will begin to lose its power to write you so deeply in the old ink. The fulfilled self will appear sooner. The return will become gentler. The revised version will begin to feel more natural than the first reaction. And little by little, through this tender evening mercy, your relation to the desire will be rewritten from struggle into acceptance, from fear into dwelling, from old identity into the new one that is already learning how to sleep in peace.